The Mafia boss thought his black maid hated him, until he discovered her secret sacrifice. He was a man who ruled with an iron fist, feared and respected in equal measure. Dominic Castellano, the Mafia boss, held the city in the palm of his hand. His life was filled with wealth, power, and a carefully curated empire. But despite his success, there was one thing he couldn't figure out: his black maid, a woman named Mary, whom he had employed for almost a year now. From the moment she arrived at his mansion, she seemed different. While other staff members cowered in fear, obeying his every word without question, Mary stood apart. She was quiet, distant, and her eyes often seemed to hold a deep sorrow, as though she were hiding a part of herself that even he could not break through. He had grown used to seeing his workers' submission, but Mary was another story. Her expressions were unreadable, and she never engaged in conversation unless absolutely necessary. He thought she must hate him. After all, why else would someone in her position behave so coldly? She was a maid, just like all the others, but something about her demeanor made her seem different. He had observed her from a distance, watching her interactions with the other staff. She was polite, yes, but there was no warmth, no smile, no attempt to befriend anyone. She went about her duties with efficiency and precision, but there was a wall between them that Dominic could never seem to penetrate. One afternoon, he passed by the hallway where Mary was cleaning. He stopped for a moment to watch her. She was wiping down a large mirror, her movements slow and deliberate. For the first time, he noticed the weariness in her posture, the way her shoulders slumped slightly under the weight of the work. He had always assumed she was just another employee, doing her job without question, but something about her tired eyes made him wonder. Was it possible that she was not as indifferent as he thought? Could there be more to her story? That day, something shifted. As he watched her, he realized there was something deeper at play, something hidden beneath the surface. Little did he know, he was about to uncover a secret that would change the way he saw her forever. Stay tuned to discover what happens next. The days following that strange encounter were filled with a quiet tension. Dominic Castellano, the Mafia boss, found himself thinking more and more about Mary, the maid who seemed so distant, so different from everyone else in his life. His curiosity about her grew, but he couldn't bring himself to ask her directly. Instead, he observed from afar, trying to piece together the puzzle of her behavior. Mary's routine remained unchanged. She worked tirelessly throughout the mansion, keeping it spotless with an efficiency that was almost mechanical. Yet, there was something in her that seemed unreachable. For weeks, Dominic's thoughts lingered on her. Why did she seem so detached from everything? Was it because of the work, the isolation, or was there something more to her story that she wasn't sharing? One evening, as Dominic was finishing up a meeting in his private office, he overheard Mary speaking with the housekeeper in the hallway. The conversation was soft, barely a whisper, but the words that reached his ears made his stomach tighten. Mary was speaking about her family, her sick mother, the debt that was slowly swallowing her, the unspoken burdens she carried alone. Dominic had never imagined that his maid, the quiet woman who barely spoke to anyone, had a life filled with such hardship. His curiosity turned to concern, but it was more than that. He felt a strange urge to understand her, to help her. The following day, he made his way through the mansion as he usually did, passing by Mary as she cleaned the grand staircase. He watched her for a moment, noticing how she moved with such grace despite the exhaustion in her eyes. He wanted to speak to her, to break the wall of silence between them, but the words escaped him. What would he even say? He cleared his throat and approached her. "Mary," he said, his voice softer than usual. She paused, a look of surprise flashing across her face before she quickly regained her composure. "Yes, Mr. Castellano." Her voice was quiet, but there was a warmth in it that he hadn't heard before. "How are you doing?" It was a simple question, one that he had never asked any of his staff before. Mary hesitated for a moment, then gave a small nod. "I'm fine, sir. Just doing my job." But Dominic could see through the facade. Her words didn't match the sadness that lingered in her eyes. He didn't press further, but a seed of understanding had been planted in his mind. As the weeks passed, Dominic couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Mary's story than she let on. He knew the power he held, the influence he commanded, but when it came to her, he felt helpless. What could he do to break through to her? Then, one rainy afternoon, When the storm outside battered the windows of the mansion, Dominic found himself in the library, pacing back and forth. He had just finished a long conversation with his advisors when his thoughts returned to Mary once again. He was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. He opened it to find her standing there, holding a tray with his usual afternoon coffee. She looked different today, her posture straighter, her expression more guarded. "I brought your coffee, Mr. Castellano," she said, her voice steady but distant. As she handed him the tray, their fingers brushed for a brief moment. It was a small touch, but it sent a shiver down his spine. For the first time, he felt an undeniable connection between them. Before he could say anything, she turned to leave, but Dominic called after her. "Wait, Mary." She stopped, her back still to him. "What's really going on?" The words were out before he could stop them. There was a long pause, and for a moment, he thought she might not answer. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to burden you, sir. I'm just here to do my job." But Dominic wasn't satisfied with that. "I know you're hiding something," he said. "You don't have to do this alone." Mary turned slowly to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and surprise. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "I have no choice." Her words hung in the air, and Dominic could see the struggle in her eyes. In that moment, something inside him shifted. He wasn't just a mafia boss anymore. He was someone who wanted to help, to understand her pain. He stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to carry this burden by yourself. I can help, Mary. Let me in." For a long moment, she said nothing, her eyes searching his face. Then, with a soft sigh, she nodded. "I'll tell you everything," she said. And in that moment, Dominic Castellano knew that nothing would ever be the same between them again. The tension in the mansion was thick as Dominic waited for Mary to share the truth that she had kept hidden for so long. He had seen the walls she had built around herself, but now, standing face to face with him, she was finally going to tear them down. As she stood there in front of him, her gaze averted to the floor, Dominic could sense the unease in her posture. It was as if she was unsure of whether she should share her burdens with him, the man who controlled everything around her. But he was no longer just the mafia boss. He was someone who, for the first time, wanted to truly understand her. "Mary," Dominic said softly, his voice steady, "I want to help you. You don't have to carry this alone anymore." She took a deep breath and slowly looked up at him. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and uncertainty, but there was also a glimmer of hope, something Dominic hadn't seen before. "You don't know what it's like," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "to carry a secret that could destroy everything you've worked for. I've been hiding this for so long, not just from you, but from everyone. I don't know how to trust anyone anymore." Dominic took a step closer, his presence calming, and said, "You can trust me, Mary. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. The silence hung heavy in the air before she finally spoke again. "My mother, she's been sick for years," she began, her voice trembling. "I've been taking care of her on my own, doing whatever I can to keep her comfortable. But the doctors, they don't think she has much time left. And the bills, Dominic, they're piling up. I've been working here, doing whatever it takes, just to keep a roof over our heads, to make sure she doesn't suffer. But it's not enough. I've tried everything, but..." Her voice cracked, and she had to pause, wiping away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. Dominic stood still, letting her words sink in. He had always assumed his staff lived comfortable lives. After all, they were part of his empire. But he had never imagined the weight of responsibility that Mary carried every single day. The burden of caring for a dying mother, of being the only one who could help, and the isolation that came with it. "I'm sorry," she continued. "I never meant for you to find out. I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want pity. I didn't want to be seen as weak." Dominic's heart ached as he listened to her. He could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the desperation, and the fear that she was running out of time. "Mary, you're not weak," he said softly. "You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. You've been carrying this on your own for so long, and now it's my turn to help. You don't have to do this by yourself anymore." For the first time in what felt like forever, Mary looked up at him fully, her eyes wide with surprise. You'd help me?" she whispered, the disbelief in her voice evident. "Of course," Dominic replied, his voice unwavering. "I don't know how, but we'll figure it out. I have the resources. We'll get your mother the best care possible." A wave of relief washed over her, and she let out a shaky breath. The weight of years of struggle seemed to lift just a little. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know what to say." Dominic gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You don't have to say anything. You've carried enough alone. Let me do the rest." The silence between them was different now, warmer, more connected. It wasn't just a mafia boss and his maid anymore. It was two people who understood each other, who shared a common struggle. And for the first time in a long time, Mary felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: hope. Dominic knew he had crossed a line that he never thought he would. He had let someone into his world, someone who had shown him what true sacrifice meant. In that moment, he understood that sometimes the strongest people were the ones who carried the most weight in silence. And it was his turn to carry some of that weight for her. As Mary turned to leave the room, she paused at the door, looking back at him. "Thank you, Dominic. You have no idea how much this means to me." He nodded, his gaze softening. "You don't have to thank me. Just focus on your mother. We'll take care of the rest." As she left, Dominic stood there for a moment, reflecting on what had just happened. He had always prided himself on being in control, but today, for the first time, he realized that true strength came from helping others, from understanding their struggles and sharing in their burdens. He knew that this was just the beginning of something deeper, something that would change both of their lives forever. The next few days were a whirlwind for Dominic and Mary. Dominic immediately arranged for the best medical care for Mary's mother, contacting top doctors and specialists in the city. He was determined to keep his promise, to ease her burden and give her the chance to finally breathe. Mary, however, was still overwhelmed by the weight of it all. She had never allowed herself to hope this much. She had been so used to managing everything on her own, never relying on anyone for help. The thought that someone, especially someone like Dominic, would step in and care for her family was almost too much to bear. But as the days passed, Dominic's presence became a constant source of comfort. He kept his word and ensured that the best care was provided for her mother. It was a relief that Mary hadn't allowed herself to fully embrace until now. One evening, after a long day of work, Mary returned to her small apartment to find Dominic waiting outside. He had made it a habit to check on her daily, and this evening, he brought a small bouquet of flowers for her mother, along with an envelope that he handed to Mary. "It's for her medical expenses," Dominic said, his voice calm and reassuring. Mary looked down at the envelope, feeling the weight of his kindness settle on her heart. "You don't have to do this," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude and disbelief. "I told you, you don't have to worry about us. We've been managing just fine." Dominic stepped closer, his expression softening. "I told you, Mary, you don't have to carry this alone anymore. You've done enough. Now it's my turn to help." Mary felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at him. It was hard to accept his help, harder still to accept that someone so powerful, someone who could have anything he wanted, was offering this kind of care to her, a simple maid. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this for me?" Dominic's gaze never wavered. "Because you deserve it," he replied quietly. "Because you've spent your life taking care of others. It's time someone took care of you for a change." Mary's heart swelled with emotion. She had never allowed herself to believe she deserved such kindness. She had always told herself that her role was to serve others, to put their needs first, while hers remained secondary. But here, in front of her, stood a man who was offering her the one thing she had never allowed herself to ask for: help. As she reached out to take the envelope, their fingers brushed, and for a moment, there was an undeniable connection between them. Something unspoken, something powerful. "I don't know how to thank you," Mary whispered, her voice barely audible. Dominic smiled gently. "You don't need to thank me. Just know that you're not alone anymore." With that, he turned to leave, but not before looking back at her. "I'll be here if you need anything." As he walked away, Mary stood in the doorway, feeling an overwhelming sense of relief wash over her. She had been so accustomed to carrying everything on her shoulders, to facing each day with the burden of responsibility weighing her down. But now, for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. The days that followed were filled with small, quiet moments that slowly began to change Mary's perception of her situation. Dominic continued to support her, offering help in ways she had never expected. He was there when her mother's condition worsened, ensuring that she had the best care, the best comfort. Slowly, Mary began to let go of her fear and allow herself to be vulnerable. She allowed herself to trust Dominic, to accept that she didn't have to do everything on her own. One evening, as they sat together in her small living room, talking about her mother's progress, Mary finally allowed herself to ask the question that had been weighing on her heart. "Dominic," she said quietly, "why are you doing this for me? You could have anyone. Anything. Why me?" Dominic's expression softened, and he placed his hand on hers, his touch gentle but reassuring. "Because I see you, Mary. I see your strength, your sacrifice, and I don't think you should have to do it all alone anymore." For the first time, Mary realized that Dominic's actions weren't just about charity. They were about something deeper, something that was slowly growing between them. A connection, a bond that neither of them had expected, but one that was beginning to change their lives in ways neither of them could have imagined. Mary had spent so many years living in the shadows, hiding her pain and her burdens, never allowing anyone to see the real her. But with Dominic, she was beginning to see that it was okay to let go, to trust, to allow someone else in. She had never imagined that the man she had once thought of as distant and untouchable would become the one person who would help her find a new sense of hope. And as the days went by, that hope began to grow. Dominic and Mary were no longer just employer and employee. They were becoming something more, something that neither of them could deny. The days passed in a blur for Mary. The weight of her responsibilities, once so heavy, had lifted just a little, thanks to Dominic's unwavering support. He kept his promises, ensuring her mother received the care she needed and that the financial strain was no longer suffocating her. For the first time in years, Mary could finally breathe, but even more than that, something else was changing inside her. She was beginning to trust Dominic. She was beginning to feel a warmth she had never allowed herself to feel before. Dominic, for his part, was more than just helpful. His actions spoke volumes. He was there when her mother's condition worsened, when she was admitted to the hospital for a particularly dangerous procedure. He stayed by her side, never once leaving her to face the fear alone. It was strange to Mary. This man who could command empires, who could have anything he wanted, had chosen to be there for her. Every moment spent with Dominic made her question everything she thought she knew about him. He wasn't the cold, distant boss she had first imagined. There was a softness to him, a vulnerability that only showed when he looked at her, when he spoke to her in a way that was entirely different from how he spoke to others. One evening, as they sat together in the small hospital room, waiting for updates on her mother's surgery, Dominic turned to her, his eyes filled with something she had never seen before, genuine care. "You've been through so much," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how you've carried it all this time." Mary looked down at her hands, feeling the weight of his words. She had always been the one who carried everyone else's burdens. Her mother, her family, her work. She had been everything to everyone. But now, for the first time, she wasn't alone. "I didn't have a choice," Mary replied, her voice shaky. "I had to do it. I didn't want to let anyone down." Dominic reached out and gently placed his hand over hers, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. "You don't have to carry it all alone anymore. I'm here, Mary. Whatever happens, I'm here." The sincerity in his voice melted something inside her. She had always kept people at arm's length, afraid to let anyone get too close, but Dominic's presence was different. He wasn't like the others who had come and gone in her life. He was steady, reliable, and his actions were proof of his words. As the hours ticked by and her mother's surgery was finally over, Dominic remained by her side, keeping her company, offering words of encouragement. When the doctor finally arrived with news, it was good. Her mother had pulled through. She was stable, and the prognosis was positive. Mary felt a wave of relief wash over her, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to cry, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude. "She's going to be okay," Mary whispered through her tears. Dominic smiled softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "I'm glad, Mary. You deserve to have peace." The words felt like a balm to her wounded soul, and in that moment, something shifted. Mary had always believed that the cost of peace was sacrifice, that in order to achieve anything meaningful, she had to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. But with Dominic, she was starting to see that peace could come without the constant need to sacrifice. She didn't have to do everything herself. And she didn't have to be alone. As they left the hospital together later that night, Mary looked at Dominic with a new sense of understanding. He had become more than just the Mafia boss she had known. He had become someone who had given her a glimpse of something she had long given up on: hope. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe in it. She had spent so many years trapped in a cycle of duty and self-reliance, never allowing herself to experience the kind of connection that she now shared with Dominic. But now, as they walked side by side, Mary realized that she had not only found help in him, but she had found something far more valuable: companionship, trust, and maybe, just maybe, love. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. "You've done more for me than I ever thought possible." Dominic squeezed her hand gently. "You don't need to thank me, Mary. I'm just glad I could be here for you. And I always will be." As they walked into the night, with the cool air of a fresh beginning surrounding them, Mary knew that everything had changed. The life she had once known, the life of solitude and sacrifice, was no longer her reality. With Dominic by her side, she finally had the chance to live a life of peace, a life of connection, and maybe even love. As the days turned into weeks, Dominic and Mary found themselves in a routine that was strangely comforting. Her mother's health had steadily improved, thanks to the best medical care Dominic had provided, and Mary had slowly begun to breathe easier. For the first time in years, she was allowing herself to relax, to enjoy the little moments of peace she had longed for. But it was also during this time that Dominic found himself feeling something he had never expected, something deeper than just a sense of duty. His actions, his support, had begun to form a connection between them that neither could ignore. Every day, Dominic found himself thinking about Mary more and more. The way she smiled when she saw her mother recovering, the way her eyes softened when she looked at him, the way she began to trust him with parts of herself that she had never shared before. It was all starting to change him. For the first time, he was seeing beyond the walls he had carefully built around himself. He was seeing a side of himself that he had long buried, a side that cared for others in ways he hadn't known were possible. But as much as he felt this growing connection, he was still unsure of how Mary felt. She had always been quiet and reserved, never giving him any indication that she might feel the same way. And though he was sure that the bond between them had deepened, there was still a part of him that hesitated. He didn't want to push her, not when she had already trusted him with so much. So, instead, he continued to support her in the quiet, subtle ways that he had always done. He made sure her mother had everything she needed. He kept his promises to help with her finances. He made it clear, through his actions, that he was there for her, no matter what. And still, he found himself longing for something more. One evening, as they sat in the garden of the mansion, watching the sunset together, Dominic finally spoke what had been weighing on his heart. "Mary," he began, his voice soft, "I've been thinking about something, and I need to ask you, how do you feel about everything that's happened?" Mary turned to him, her expression unreadable, but there was a flicker in her eyes, something vulnerable, something open. She took a deep breath, her hands folded in her lap. "I don't know," she replied honestly. "I've never allowed myself to feel this way. I've spent so many years just surviving, just taking care of others, that I didn't know how to allow myself to be cared for. And then you came into my life." She paused, her gaze searching his face, as if trying to find the right words. "You've done so much for me, for my mother, for everything. I never expected any of this. But now, I can't deny that I feel something too." Dominic's heart skipped a beat. The words he had been longing to hear, the words he had hoped would come, were finally spoken. And yet, there was still a part of him that hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "What do you feel, Mary?" he asked gently, his voice barely above a whisper. Mary's eyes softened, and she looked away for a moment, as if collecting her thoughts. "I feel like I can finally breathe," she said slowly. "Like I don't have to carry everything on my own anymore. And I feel safe with you. For the first time in a long time, I don't feel alone." Dominic's chest tightened at her words. She didn't know it, but he had been carrying that same loneliness, that same burden, in his own way. He had built his empire on power and control, but none of that had ever filled the emptiness inside him. And now, here she was, this woman who had come into his life and shown him that there was more to life than what he had known. "Mary," he said softly, reaching for her hand. "You're not alone anymore. I'll always be here for you. I know I've said that before, but I mean it." She turned back to him, her eyes full of emotion, and for the first time, she allowed herself to smile. It was a small smile, but it was genuine. It was the smile of someone who had finally allowed herself to trust, to open her heart. And in that moment, Dominic knew that everything had changed. He wasn't just the Mafia boss anymore. He wasn't just the man who had helped her out of obligation. He was someone who cared for her deeply. And for the first time, he felt something he had never allowed himself to feel: love. They sat there for a while, just holding each other's gaze, the quiet of the evening wrapping around them like a blanket. There was no need for words. They both knew what had changed, and they both knew where this was heading. In the days that followed, Dominic and Mary found themselves growing closer. It wasn't something that happened overnight, but it was something that had been building for a while. Their bond deepened with every passing day, until it was no longer just about helping each other. It was about being there for each other, truly and completely. For Mary, it was a new beginning. A beginning where she no longer had to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders alone. And for Dominic, it was the start of something unexpected, something he never could have predicted. He had found a kind of peace he never thought possible, and he had found it in her, in Mary. And as they moved forward together, they knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of a future they would build together. As the days turned into weeks, Dominic and Mary continued to grow closer. Their connection, once forged in kindness and support, was now blossoming into something more. It was subtle at first, the way they looked at each other when no one was watching, the way their conversations carried more weight than before, and the moments where their hands brushed and lingered a little longer than necessary. It was clear to both of them that they had crossed a threshold, but neither of them spoke about it directly. They didn't need to. Their actions, their gestures, spoke volumes. Yet, despite the undeniable bond that was forming, a quiet tension still lingered between them. Mary, for all her strength, was still cautious. She had spent so many years carrying the weight of the world on her own shoulders, and though Dominic had shown her that she didn't have to do it alone anymore, there was a part of her that still struggled with vulnerability. She had never let anyone in before, not like this. And Dominic, despite all his power and influence, wasn't immune to his own doubts. He had never allowed himself to care for anyone in the way he cared for Mary. He was the leader of an empire, a man who had built his world on control, but when it came to Mary, he was different. She made him want to be a better man, one who didn't rely on his wealth and power, but on something deeper. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of his mansion, overlooking the city, Dominic finally spoke the words that had been weighing on his heart. "Mary," he said quietly, his voice low and sincere, "I can't stop thinking about how much you've changed my life." Mary turned to look at him, her expression soft but cautious. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just trying to survive, Dominic. You've been so kind to me, but I don't want to get in the way of your life. I don't want to be a burden." Dominic reached over and gently took her hand in his, a gesture that was both comforting and intimate. "You're not a burden," he said firmly. "You're not in the way. You've brought something into my life that I never even knew I was missing. You've given me a reason to be better, to see the world differently, and I don't want to let that go." Mary's heart skipped a beat at his words, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to truly feel something other than fear, something other than doubt. She felt a warmth spread through her, a feeling of being seen, being valued, in a way that she had never experienced before. "But I'm not like you, Dominic," she said softly. "I'm just a maid. I don't belong in your world." Dominic's thumb gently traced the back of her hand as he spoke, his voice filled with sincerity. "You belong in my world, Mary. You've always belonged in it. I don't care about titles or status. I care about you, and I want you to know that, no matter what happens, you're not alone. I won't let you be alone." Mary's eyes welled with tears, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. She had always believed that she wasn't worthy of someone like him, that her life would always be defined by her struggles and sacrifices. But now, sitting there with Dominic, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she could allow herself to hope for something more. "You're all I've ever wanted," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "I never thought I could have something like this. I never thought I could have someone who cares for me, not out of pity, but because they truly want to. Dominic leaned closer, his gaze locking with hers. You deserve more than you know, Mary. And I'm not going anywhere. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their words settling between them, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was a silence that held the promise of something new, something beautiful. The air between them had shifted, and they both knew that things could never go back to how they were. This was the beginning of something deeper, something neither of them had expected but both had needed. As the evening wore on, they found themselves talking more, sharing more, allowing the walls they had built around themselves to crumble bit by bit. For the first time, Mary felt like she could truly trust someone. And for Dominic, he had found a softness in his heart that he had never known existed. As they stood together, looking out over the city, Dominic pulled her closer, his arm wrapping around her. We'll face everything together, he said, his voice filled with conviction. Mary smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. Together, she whispered. In that moment, they both understood that their lives had changed forever. They were no longer just employer and employee. They were something much more. Two people who had found in each other the strength to face the world, not alone, but together. The days following their conversation were filled with a quiet intensity. Dominic and Mary's bond was growing stronger with each passing moment. Every time they shared a smile, a laugh, or even a look, it felt as if the walls they had both built around themselves were slowly crumbling. They were no longer just two people in a complicated relationship. They were becoming something much deeper, something neither of them had expected. For Mary, it was a revelation. She had spent so many years believing that she wasn't worthy of love, that her life would always be defined by her hardships. But with Dominic, everything had changed. He was different from anyone she had ever known. He didn't look at her as just a maid or a servant. He saw her as a person, as someone deserving of love and care. It was something she had never allowed herself to feel before, and yet, with him, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Dominic, on the other hand, found himself in uncharted territory. He had always been a man of power, someone who controlled everything around him. But with Mary, he felt vulnerable in a way he had never experienced. He had never been one to open up to anyone, but with her, he found himself doing just that. She had shown him a side of himself that he had long buried, and in return, he was determined to show her just how much she meant to him. One evening, as they sat together in the grand library of his mansion, Dominic looked at Mary with a newfound tenderness. He had something on his mind, something he had been meaning to say for a while, but hadn't found the right words for. Mary, he began, his voice soft and steady. I need to tell you something. Something I've been thinking about for a while now. Mary turned to him, her expression curious, but also open. What is it, Dominic? She asked, her voice gentle. He hesitated for a moment, collecting his thoughts. I want you to know that I'm here for you. Not just because of the things I've done for you and your mother, but because I care about you. I care about you in a way I've never cared about anyone before. And I'm not just talking about what we've been through together. I'm talking about everything. You. Your heart, your strength, everything. Mary's heart skipped a beat as his words sank in. She had known for a while now that there was something more between them, but hearing him say it out loud made it feel real. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was worthy of love. Dominic, she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. I don't know what to say. I never expected this. I never thought someone like you would ever look at me like that. I'm just a maid. I never thought I could have someone who cared about me like this. Dominic reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. You're not just a maid, Mary, he said firmly, his eyes never leaving hers. You are so much more than that. And you deserve so much more than you've ever allowed yourself to believe. I see you, Mary, and I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. The warmth in his words melted the last of the doubts that had lingered in her heart. She had spent so many years guarding herself, hiding behind walls built out of fear and pain. But with Dominic, she felt like she could finally let go. She felt safe. I never thought I could have this, Mary whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. I never thought I could have someone who sees me, really sees me. I never thought I could have someone who wanted to take care of me, to be there for me the way you have. Dominic's heart swelled with emotion as he gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. You're not alone anymore, Mary. I'll be here for you, no matter what. and I'll always be here to take care of you. The weight of his words settled over her like a comforting blanket. For the first time in her life, she felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders alone. She had someone to lean on, someone who was truly there for her. And that was a feeling she had never known before. As they sat in the library, wrapped in each other's presence, the world outside seemed to fade away. All that mattered was the connection they shared, the bond that was growing stronger by the day. Dominic had shown her a love that was patient, kind, and unconditional. And for the first time in her life, Mary felt like she was enough, just as she was. She had found something beautiful in the unlikeliest of places, a man who saw her, who valued her, and who would stand by her side through anything. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to truly believe that love could be hers. Dominic and Mary sat in silence, the comfort of each other's company enough to fill the room. It was a moment of peace, a moment that neither of them had expected, but both of them had longed for. And as the night drew on, they both knew that their journey together was just beginning, that the future held so much more than they could ever imagine. The days following their heartfelt conversation were filled with new emotions for both Dominic and Mary. A sense of calm had settled between them, but it was no longer just the comfort of silence. It was the comfort of knowing they had crossed an important line in their relationship, a line that neither of them had expected to cross. Their bond, once built on necessity, was now transforming into something much deeper, something both raw and tender. Mary had been through so much, and Dominic had seen that. He had witnessed her strength, her resilience, but also her vulnerability, the quiet sorrow that she had carried for so long. And now, as she allowed herself to open up to him more, he was beginning to see the woman beneath the walls she had built. The woman who was not just the maid, but someone full of depth, someone deserving of love, of care, and of peace. For Dominic, it was a revelation. He had spent his life surrounded by power, control, and a sense of invulnerability. He had always been the one in charge, the one who made the rules. But with Mary, he was learning that sometimes true strength came from caring for someone else. It wasn't about controlling every situation or keeping people at a distance. It was about opening up, showing vulnerability, and allowing someone else to see you for who you truly were. Mary, too, was slowly learning that she didn't have to carry the weight of the world alone. As much as she had resisted accepting help from others, she was beginning to understand that it wasn't a weakness to let someone in. Dominic's actions had shown her that. His willingness to be there for her, to support her in every way, had allowed her to let go of some of the fear that had held her back for so long. But despite their growing closeness, there was still a part of Mary that struggled with fully embracing this new reality. She had spent years protecting herself, and letting someone else take care of her was still a concept she couldn't quite grasp. For Dominic, it was equally challenging. He had never allowed anyone to get close to him in the way Mary had. But the more he learned about her, the more he realized how much he admired her. She was not just the quiet, reserved woman he had first seen. She was strong, selfless, and kind. She had been through so much, yet she carried herself with grace. Dominic couldn't help but feel drawn to her. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of his mansion, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Dominic turned to her, his voice softer than usual. "Mary," he began, his tone sincere, "I've been thinking about everything we've been through. I never expected any of this. I didn't expect to feel this way about you." Mary turned to him, her expression a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. She had heard him speak of his feelings before, but this time, there was something different in his voice. Something deeper. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly. Dominic took a deep breath before continuing. "I've spent my whole life building this empire, creating a world where I'm in control. But none of that matters now. What matters is you. What matters is the person you are. And I'm not sure when it happened, but somewhere along the way, I started caring for you, in a way that I've never cared for anyone before." Mary's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected Dominic to say something like that. She had always thought that he was too far removed from her world, too powerful, too untouchable. But now, in this quiet moment, his words struck a chord deep inside her. "Dominic, I don't know what to say," she replied softly, her voice trembling. "I never thought I could feel this way. I've always been afraid of letting anyone in, but with you, it feels different. I've never felt like I could be this open with anyone. Dominic reached out, gently taking her hand in his. You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know that I'm here. I'm here for you, for whatever you need. And I want you to know that you're not alone. Not anymore. Mary looked into his eyes, feeling the sincerity in his words. For the first time, she felt a warmth spread through her chest, a warmth that was not born of obligation or duty, but of something real, something she had long denied herself. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know what I would do without you. Dominic smiled softly, brushing a stray hair from her face. You won't have to find out, he replied, his voice filled with quiet determination. As the night stretched on, Dominic and Mary found themselves wrapped in each other's presence, the city lights flickering below them as they sat together, their hearts open in a way they never thought possible. It wasn't just about love anymore. It was about trust, about understanding each other, and about embracing the future together. And as they sat there, side by side, they knew that this was only the beginning of something beautiful, something neither of them had expected, but both had been longing for. The days continued to unfold peacefully, and for the first time in a long time, both Dominic and Mary found themselves living a reality they had never expected. The connection they shared had deepened, and their days were filled with laughter, small moments of joy, and a growing understanding of each other. But with the calm also came a sense of uncertainty. Mary had never allowed herself to truly trust anyone before, and now that she had allowed Dominic into her heart, she found herself wondering whether this new chapter in her life was too good to be true. Dominic, on the other hand, was grappling with the same feeling. For the first time in his life, he was allowing himself to be vulnerable. He had spent so many years building an empire on control and power, but with Mary, he was learning that true strength came from letting go of control, from being open to love and trust. One evening, as the sun set behind the skyline of the city, Dominic and Mary sat on the balcony, enjoying the quiet of the night. The soft breeze brushed past them, and for a moment, it felt as though the world had slowed down just for them. Dominic turned to Mary, his expression serious yet gentle. Mary, he said softly, I know we've talked about a lot of things lately, and I know we've come a long way, but there's something I need to ask you. Mary looked at him, her heart racing. What is it? She asked, her voice quiet, almost afraid of what was coming. I need to know if you're truly ready for this, Dominic said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Are you ready to fully trust me, to be with me, to embrace what we have? I know this is new, and I know it's complicated, but I want to make sure that you're not holding back because of fear. I don't want to push you into something you're not ready for, but I also don't want to waste time pretending that we're not heading in the same direction. I want to know that we're in this together, completely. Mary took a deep breath, her mind swirling with emotions. She had never imagined that she would find herself here, with a man like Dominic, someone so powerful, so different from everyone she had ever known. She had spent so much time guarding herself, afraid of getting hurt. But now, sitting here with him, she realized that maybe, just maybe, it was time to let go of those fears. She had already let him in, and the trust they shared felt like something solid, something she didn't want to lose. She looked at Dominic, her heart swelling with emotion. I'm ready, she said, her voice strong and sure. I'm ready to be with you, to trust you completely. I don't want to hold back anymore. I've spent too long being afraid of things I can't control, but with you, I feel like I can be myself. I feel safe with you, Dominic. I feel like I don't have to pretend anymore. Dominic's expression softened, and he reached for her hand, gently holding it in his. That's all I needed to hear, he said, his voice filled with relief. I've never wanted anything more than to be with you, Mary. I know we've both had our share of struggles, but together, I believe we can face anything. And I want you to know that I'm here for you, always. I will never let you go. Mary smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek as she looked at him. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to truly believe in the future. She didn't have to do everything alone anymore. She had someone by her side who understood her, who accepted her, and who loved her for who she was. And for that, she was more grateful than words could express. The night stretched on, and the two of them sat in silence, wrapped in each other's presence. It was a peaceful silence, one that held no fear, no uncertainty. It was the silence of two people who had found something real, something worth holding on to. As they stood up to go inside, Dominic gently placed his arm around Mary's shoulders, pulling her close. "Let's take this one day at a time," he said, his voice full of hope. "We've already come so far, and I believe we have a long road ahead of us. Together." Mary nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle in her heart. "Together," she whispered. And as they walked back into the mansion, side by side, they both knew that this was only the beginning. Their journey had just begun, and no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The love they shared was strong, and it was only growing stronger with each passing day. The weeks that followed were a quiet bliss for Dominic and Mary, but there was a growing realization between them that the path they had chosen was not going to be without its challenges. They had opened up to each other, shared their deepest fears and desires, and allowed themselves to trust completely. Yet something still lingered in the air, an unspoken truth that both of them knew was bound to surface. Despite all the comfort and warmth they had found in each other, there was still the matter of Dominic's world, the world of the Mafia. It wasn't just a shadow that loomed over their relationship. It was an undeniable fact that shaped everything around him. And Mary, no matter how much she had come to care for him, had never been part of that world. One evening, as they sat in the garden, enjoying the cool breeze of the evening, Dominic could sense the tension in the air. Mary had been quiet for the past hour, her gaze distant as she watched the stars slowly appear in the sky. He had been waiting for the right moment to address the lingering doubt he saw in her eyes. "Mary," he began gently, "I know things have been moving fast, and I know we've shared a lot with each other. But there's something I haven't told you yet, something you deserve to know." Mary turned to face him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of what he was about to say. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady but soft. Dominic took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I don't want you to think that this," he motioned between the two of them, "is just a fantasy. It's not. I'm here, with you, because I care about you more than I've ever cared about anyone. But my world, the world I'm a part of, is not something that's easy to leave behind." Mary listened intently, feeling the weight of his words, but she also understood the unspoken fear that lay behind them. She had never asked him to change who he was, but she had known from the start that his world was complicated. "I know, Dominic," she replied softly. "I know what you do. I've seen the power you hold, and I've seen the way people look at you. I'm not afraid of your world, but I'm afraid of what it might mean for us. I've never been part of that, and I'm not sure I can fit into it." Dominic reached out, taking her hand in his grip firm but reassuring. "Mary, you've never had to fit into it. You never have to be part of it. But you are part of my life now, and I want you to know that, no matter what, I will protect you. I will do whatever it takes to keep you safe. I won't let anything happen to you." Mary's heart swelled at his words, but there was still a part of her that remained uncertain. She had never known a life like his, never been surrounded by the darkness and danger that his world entailed. And though Dominic was kind and gentle with her, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen when the reality of his dangerous life caught up with them. "But what happens when it catches up to us?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What happens when the people from your world come into our lives?" Dominic's expression grew more serious, the weight of the question settling over him. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I promise you this. I will never put you in a position where you're at risk. I don't want to live without you, Mary. And if there's one thing I know, it's that I'll protect what's mine, no matter the cost." Mary looked at him, her heart torn between the love she felt for him and the fear of the life he was offering. She had never been a part of anything like this before, and the unknown stretched out before her like a vast, uncharted ocean. But Dominic's words were comforting, and she could see the sincerity in his eyes. "I don't want to lose you either, Dominic," she said softly. "But I need to know that this is something we can face together. I need to know that I'm not just walking into a world I can't understand." Dominic squeezed her hand gently, a promise in his touch. "We'll face it together, Mary. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." The silence that followed was thick with emotion, but it wasn't a silence of doubt. It was a silence of understanding. Neither of them had all the answers, but for the first time, they both knew that they were ready to take the next step, to face whatever came their way. It wasn't just about love anymore. It was about trust, loyalty, and the willingness to fight for each other. As they sat in the quiet of the night, The weight of the world outside seemed distant. In that moment, they were just two people, holding on to each other, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that together, they could weather any storm. The following weeks unfolded with a sense of certainty and unease that neither Dominic nor Mary had anticipated. They had come to a place of peace, but with that peace came the underlying tension that their love had yet to be fully tested. The more time they spent together, the more they began to understand the depth of the emotional connection between them. Still, the shadows of Dominic's past lingered. His world was dangerous, unpredictable, and not one that Mary had ever envisioned herself stepping into. They had shared their most vulnerable truths, but there was one truth still left unsaid, one that neither of them wanted to confront but knew they must. The moment arrived when Dominic's past would come calling. It came without warning, in the form of a late-night phone call that Dominic took with a quiet, resolute expression on his face. Mary watched him from the other side of the room, knowing the call was about something far more serious than anything they had faced together. Dominic, usually calm and composed, seemed to grow tense with each passing second. Finally, he hung up and turned to her. "We have a situation," he said, his voice low, but the weight of the words was clear. Mary immediately sensed the shift in the air. "What happened?" she asked, her voice steady despite the sudden anxiety creeping into her chest. "A business deal went sour," Dominic replied, his jaw tightening. "The kind of deal that gets complicated quickly. There are people who won't back down, and we need to handle it before it gets out of hand." Mary felt a lump form in her throat. She knew that Dominic's life was filled with complexities, but hearing him speak in such a way, with that familiar coldness she had seen when he spoke about his empire, reminded her of the world she had never been a part of, the world she was now becoming too entangled with. "What does this mean for us?" she asked, a hint of worry in her voice. "It means," Dominic said, stepping toward her, "that you may be in danger. I won't let anyone hurt you, but this is the reality of the world I live in." Mary's heart sank as she absorbed the weight of his words. "I don't want to live in fear, Dominic," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I don't want to be a part of this dangerous world. I can't be, not like this. I want to be with you, but I don't know how much more I can take." Dominic's face softened, the intensity of his earlier expression melting away into something more vulnerable. He reached for her, taking her hands in his. "You don't have to be afraid. I promise I'll do everything I can to keep you safe. This situation, it's temporary. But I need you to understand that I can't walk away from this. My world, it's part of who I am, whether I like it or not. But I want you in my life. I want you here with me." Mary looked into his eyes, seeing the man she had come to know, the man who had opened his heart to her, the man who had shown her love she never thought she deserved. But now, with the weight of his world pressing down on them, she wondered if their love was enough to overcome the danger that seemed to be closing in. "I'm scared, Dominic," she whispered. "I don't know if I can keep living like this, with the constant fear of what could happen next." Dominic pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, the comfort of his embrace a silent promise. "You won't be alone," he whispered. "We'll face this together. No matter what happens, I'll protect you. I will always protect you." The sincerity in his voice gave her a sense of comfort, but the fear that had begun to take root in her heart remained. How much longer could they live like this, with the constant danger lurking around them? How could she keep her heart open when the threat of losing everything was always present? That night, as they lay together in the quiet of the mansion, Mary's mind raced with thoughts of the future. She had always been independent, always carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. But now, for the first time, she felt like she was stepping into a life where she couldn't control everything. She had to trust someone else, trust Dominic, and that was harder than she ever imagined. In the days that followed, Dominic did everything in his power to protect her, but the unease never left the air. He was doing everything he could to navigate the dangers of his world, but it was clear that the tension was rising. They couldn't ignore it forever. The night finally came when everything came to a head. Dominic received another call, this one more urgent, more dire. The people who had been causing trouble were closer than ever. The situation had escalated, and now there was no choice but to face it head on. Dominic turned to Mary, his face etched with resolve. "It's time," he said. "We have to deal with this now. But no matter what happens, Mary, Remember that I'll never let anything happen to you." Mary nodded, her heart heavy with fear, but also filled with the strength of the love they had built together. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew one thing for sure. They would face it together, no matter what came their way. The moment had arrived. The situation was escalating, and for the first time, Dominic was truly facing the consequences of the dangerous world he had built. He had done everything he could to protect Mary, but now, the looming threat was too close to ignore. He had made the promise to her, to keep her safe, to protect her at all costs, but he wasn't sure how much longer that promise could hold. Mary stood beside him in the quiet of the mansion, the weight of the moment pressing down on them both. "We can't run from this anymore," Dominic said, his voice steady, yet filled with a hint of urgency. He had been trying to shield her from the world he had once ruled, but now he realized that they couldn't stay hidden forever. "Whatever happens, Mary," he continued, his eyes locking with hers, "I need you to know that I would never let anything happen to you. This world, it's mine to deal with, but you are mine to protect." Mary nodded, her heart racing but her expression calm. She had come to realize that she couldn't live in fear of the unknown anymore. She had already come so far in opening herself up to Dominic, and now, with the stakes higher than ever, she knew that the only way forward was to face whatever came together. "I trust you, Dominic," she said, her voice firm, though there was a tremor in it. "I don't want to be afraid anymore. I don't want to lose you." Dominic stepped closer, taking her hands in his, holding them gently, but with strength. "You won't lose me, Mary. I promise." They stood there, in the quiet of the night, knowing that they were about to face something neither of them could predict. The danger was closing in, but for the first time, they both felt a sense of certainty. Together, they could face anything. Dominic made the call. His voice was cold and commanding as he spoke to his men, giving instructions that would set the wheels of the plan in motion. Mary stood by, watching him, understanding that the man she loved had to do what he had been trained to do. She had always known that Dominic was powerful, but now, standing beside him in this moment, she understood the weight of that power, the lives that were affected by it, the sacrifices it demanded. The plan was set. Dominic and Mary would move fast. They had to. The moment the threat was neutralized, they would leave the mansion, leave the danger behind. But as they prepared to act, there was a deep, unspoken understanding between them. They were not just running away from danger. They were running toward a new life, one where they could finally be free of the shadows of Dominic's past. The night was tense. Dominic's men moved quickly and decisively, taking care of the immediate threat that had been looming over them. The air was thick with anticipation, but as the minutes passed, the danger seemed to recede. For the first time in what felt like forever, they were safe. Mary breathed a sigh of relief, her hands still tightly clasped in Dominic's. As the situation was brought under control, Dominic turned to Mary, his face softening with relief. "It's over," he said, his voice a whisper of exhaustion. "We're safe now. We can go. Together." Mary looked at him, a mixture of gratitude and relief washing over her. She had feared this moment. But now, standing with him, she realized that it had been worth it. They had faced the darkness together, and they had emerged on the other side stronger than ever. "Together," she whispered, the word carrying all the hope she had long buried inside her. And with that, they left the mansion. The life that had once defined Dominic was no longer something they had to live. They stepped into the unknown, but for the first time, they were not afraid. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape. As they drove away, the night sky stretched out before them, a symbol of the endless possibilities that lay ahead. The dangers of Dominic's world had been pushed aside, and they had come through it together, their bond stronger than ever. No matter what the future held, they knew one thing for sure. They were not alone. They had each other. And with that, they were ready to face whatever came next. They were free. Free to build the life they had always wanted. A life full of love, trust, and the promise of a future without fear. And with that promise, they knew they could overcome anything, together.